Brought to you by Connect.js, Atlanta's premier JavaScript conference. Sponsored in part by FeatherDirect. Need a mobile app? Contact us for your custom mobile solution.
How you doing? My name is Michael Johnson. A lot of people call me MJ. Quick show of hands, how many Michaels do we have in the audience? Holy crap, that's not as many as I thought. But that's the reason I go by MJ most of the time. Traditionally, I came at development from the design aspect. Over the years, I found that I was writing more code than I was playing in Photoshop, and just kind of turned most of my attention that way. Currently at Huge Inc. Previously, I've been at Sapient Nitro, Iconologic, and I've taught classes at both Creative Circus and at Portfolio Center. And some of the stuff that I've done that you may have seen, kiosks over at the Home Depot, kiosks for Sport Check and a company called Brigo, some fun stuff for Coke, Chrysler, and Promethean if you've heard of them. And that's, talking about Brigo and Sport Check and kiosks. Well, I was able to get into animation pretty early on because whenever you're working at a kiosk, you get to choose what the platform is. You don't have to worry about Internet Explorer. So, lucky in that respect. Anyway, if you need to get in touch with me, or on Twitter, Blue Kayaks. Anyway, like I said, I come at this from a design background, so I tend to look for CSS solutions rather than pure JavaScript ones. I'm not saying that's the best way to do everything. Some of these new libraries are pretty fantastic. A lot of ways to skin a cat. You might have a better way. We still have a prefixing problem, but it's almost gone. Last I checked, the biggest holdout was Android. Pretty much everybody else has dropped the need for them. Pretty much all my code examples, I'm leaving out prefixing, but you can use, things like, precompilers take care of that. I don't know everything, and some of the stuff that I talk about is probably not going to be true in a few months. And let me just go ahead and be honest. I guess I drank the Angular Kool-Aid about a year and a half ago. Sometimes it's not the perfect thing for every project, but I really enjoy working in it. And I feel like, as someone who traditionally, used to just write HTML and CSS and use jQuery to kind of sprinkle in a little bit of interactivity, Angular has given me a lot of power, and I really dig that. So before we start getting into what the ng-animation system gives us, I figured we'd do a quick recap on animations and transitions in case you haven't gotten to use them a lot. So before we do that, there are a few CSS properties that you really should be comfortable with, and I'm sure we all are. Position, relative, and absolute, and the relationship between the two. That being that something that's position absolute gets its positioning from the parent if it has positioning. That whole concept, right? If you haven't been using transforms, they're a lot of fun. You can translate as moving things around. Can scale, skew, and rotate. But the reason I bring up transforms is they're extraordinarily performant when it comes to CSS animation. Opacity, no-brainer. When we're talking about transitions and keyframe animations, a good rule of thumb is that if it's numerical, or in the case of colors, hex, it can probably be animated. Where you run into problems, the exception there is gradients and things that have keywords. So one of the toughest things with CSS animation has been the display none problem, right? When it's display none, it has no CSS properties. If you go from display none to display block and you want to fade it in, well, you need some sort of intermediary. And that's the whole point of Angular animation. So what is an animation? Animation is simply time and change. You're adding the element of time to a style change on your element. So, talking a little bit about transitions. By default, any change we make is calculated in the transition. So if we change the font size, we change the width, the background color, anything like that, if we just put a regular transition on it, all of those properties are going to change with that action. But you need an action. What are those actions? Well, traditionally, without the use of JavaScript, the main thing that you get with transitions is hover actions, right? So in this case right here, the thing that we were going to hover on is going to scale up and rotate a little bit. There are other ways to tweak these transitions. We can obviously give it a duration. We can delay that transition for however long we want. We can control what properties transition and which ones don't. So if we want it to just fade in, we can do that and not actually have like the background color change, even though that was a property that changed during that action. And we can also use different timing functions. And what are timing functions? Well, timing functions are the math that happens with the animation. So I've got a quick little demo here. So if you look at like the linear, the speed of it is constant throughout the animation. Ease is the default timing function that's on all transitions and on keyframe animations. And what you'll notice is that it starts quickly. It gets up to full speed quickly, and then at the end, it kind of tapers off. Ease in is much like when you're in a car, you're getting on the interstate, you're going from 0 to, depending upon what time of day, 75 miles per hour over a certain amount of time. You hit that max speed and you stay at that. Ease out is the opposite. That's the braking of a car. Ease in out has a curve that tapers out on both sides. You can do your own custom easing. There's tools for it online. I don't recommend trying to write those by hand. And you also need to think about what you have your transition on. So if we were to look at this, it makes a big difference if you have the transition on the element itself or on the hover action. Being that with the hover action, as soon as your mouse leaves that object, it's going to snap back to its original position. Where if you had the transition on the element itself, it would go gradually back to its original spot. So briefly, on keyframe animations. Keyframe animations have two different pieces to it. First is the keyframe list. This thing's so good. And like in this particular one right here, I have 0%, 50%, 100%. You can add as many of those in there as you want. And you can change as many different properties in there as you want. So if you want the background color to change, the border to change 4 different times, you want it to scale out big and then go to its final destination, you can do all of that. And then whenever you actually want to run the animation, you use the animation declaration. You tell it which keyframe list to use, and then a number of other properties. And the most simple way is to just give it the duration. And like transitions, there are a lot of different ways that you can tweak these things. You can give it a delay. You can change the timing function on it, which there's an additional one to the list that we saw previously called step, which allows you to do like traditional like sprite-based animations. It's kind of fun. Iteration count. You can have the animation loop several times. The direction, you can have it go forwards, backwards, or you can have it go forwards, then backwards. And then the fill mode just really determines, where the animation is. So if you have keyframe list, it gets to the end of it. You can tell it to stay at the end, or you can tell it to go back to whatever its original styles were. All right, so let's put this into the context of Angular. Remember when I was talking about the display none problem? Well, most of the time most of the tools that ng-animate gives us are based on adding things to the DOM or the addition and removing of classes. So to get started with it, first thing you need to do is link in the module. You can get it from the CDN. If you're a Bower user, you can easily install it into your project. You just need to remember to add it to your index. But then you need to add it as a dependency into your application, into your module. A few notes. It doesn't run on Bootstrap. So whenever the application initially loads, all your animations aren't going to start firing at once. It waits a couple of digests for things to get fully loaded, to kind of settle themselves, and then your animations are going to take place. And due to some performance reasons and some other technical stuff that I'm not terribly privy to, originally child animations were completely blocked, meaning that if you were using ng-animate to bring on a page, but you had other animations going on inside the page, Angular actually blocked those other animations from taking place. You can get around that by adding the ng-animate children directive to the parent element. But 1.3 is supposedly going to change this completely. So, what Angular is going to do for us is going to give us some useful hooks to help animate different things. And this is a list of the things that ng-animate can help us with. We have ng-repeat, view, include, if, switch, show, hide, class, model, and form. That's a lot of different things, and there's slight nuances to some of them. But to simplify things, you really have two different types of animation classes. You have items that are being added and removed from the DOM, and then you have items that are being manipulated. So in the case of repeat, view, include, if, and switch, all of these things are instances where Angular is adding something to the DOM. So like an ng-if, like you've got an enormous form or something like that, you can use an if statement on it, and it's not going to get rendered in the DOM until it's actually needed. Add and remove, so add and remove whenever you're adding and removing classes. So that's your show, hide. Mainly the ones you need to worry about there are show, hide, and class. So let's start by looking at enter and leave. The first thing you start off with is the animation name. And this is the class that you create, that you have the transition or keyframe animation on. When it enters the DOM, the ng-enter class is added to it. Almost immediately after that is the ng-enter active class. So this gives you a place to go. So your ng-enter starts first. So if you're wanting to fade in, that would be your opacity 0. You've gone from display none, it's entered, and now you have this initial state. And then active gives you your animation a hook to play into. When the object is being removed from the DOM, the class that gets added to it is ng-leave, and then ng-leave active is the transition that you're stepping into. So really, to get this stuff working, all you have to do is have that animation class on it with a transition and some sort of change. Keyframes work almost the exact same way, although with keyframes you don't so much have to worry about the active class, because it's just going to run through its keyframe steps. The ng-enter is going to get removed, and you'll be left with your pristine element. So, a little quick explanation of this. So, one of the main reasons that you'd be using this is on ng-view. So in this particular case, I've got a short little application I built. Mainly it's just built through the Yeoman generator. And I've got this class on my view container called animate fade in. In this particular class, it has a transition on the interstate where there's a slight, now, let's move some of this out of the way. Actually stepped ahead of myself then. So it's a quick little fade in. The transition going from opacity 0 to an opacity of 1. And then whenever I go to a different view, that particular view just simply fades in. Now, there's a problem that you're going to run into pretty quickly with fading things in and fading things out. So this is just a fade in. But if I want to give this particular, my view container a transition on its way out, so I can try to get some little crossfade action going. What you're going to start seeing is both DOM elements, both of my views on the page at the same time. And what's happening here is actually pretty expected, right? Both of them are on the page at the same time. Unless you're using a lot of absolute positioning, these elements, as they come on, they're going to be on top of each other. They're still going to have their dimensions. So one of the ways that you can get around that is by adding a delay to your enter. That's the duration of your leave animation. This way, you can fade out and fade back in without those two elements fighting each other. So it can be used on your view container, but it can also be used on your ng repeats. So if you got a quick list of items, those can all animate in pretty easily, filter things out. It used to be a bit more complex, but with 1.2, Angular animation added in the option to stagger elements. So you no longer have to used to have to do a lot of fun JavaScript to get this stuff going. I only have it on the enter. Now, whenever like on a vertical list, things get pretty simple. But whenever you're using blocks, you also have to remember that these things have dimensions. If you're going to be using block elements, like you'll notice a difference here as things get removed. I'm actually changing the width of the item. If you're doing something like a scale or something like that, remember that that doesn't actually affect the DOM, the sizing of the particular element. So you actually have to change the width if you want things to kind of scoot over and take up that space. One trick that I've used in the past is having a container around something that actually has the dimensions. That way I can move that thing around while the visual aspects of the child can actually fill that in. So add and remove are pretty much the same thing, just slightly different. And remember, this covers ng class, ng show, ng hide, ng model, and form. I believe I leave ng model, ng form in there for the sake of completeness, but I've never actually used animations on those. The class sequence is slightly different. You have your element. When you add a class to it, well, there's the class that you're adding to it, and then it uses that and dot dash add to the sequence. And that's kind of like your ng enter. And then slightly after that, you get the add active. So again, you have those hooks, that place to go if you need it. And then whenever it's done, you're left simply with the element and the class name. Removing the element just uses the dash remove suffix, shortly followed by the remove dash active suffix. And eventually you're left with the clean element. And what's cool about this too is that whenever it's done, all these animation classes are removed. So if you're using like 3D transforms to try to get that better performance, you're not going to be left with those additional render layers on the DOM. So you're actually cleaning up some of that memory usage that, yeah, we get much better performance whenever we use these 3D transforms, but it comes at a penalty, and that penalty is memory. So at its very base, using ng class is extraordinarily simple, and honestly, you don't have to use ng-animate for just adding animations to the adding and removing of classes. All you need is that transition and some sort of style change that happens whenever you add that particular class. So in this case right here, the background would go from black to red. But since we have these hooks, we can get a little bit more complicated with it. I'm a fan of when the user says that they're done with something, you get rid of it quickly. If you want to kind of present something in a fancy way, that's one thing, but the user says they're done with it, let's get rid of it. So typically whenever I'm removing something from the DOM or hiding it or something like that, I'm going to get rid of it quickly. And this gives us the hooks to do that. Or we could have a completely different animation. If we were using keyframe animations, we could reverse the keyframe or use a completely different keyframe set. So in this case right here, doing exactly that. So whatever this was that came on had these crazy keyframe animation, and it took 5 seconds to show itself. And if I get rid of it, I use the same keyframe animation, but I do it in reverse, and it only takes 2 seconds. Show and hide, pretty much the same, but slightly different. Show and hide is just simply a predefined set of classes. Well, it's a predefined class that Angular gives us to hide content. So in this particular case, I've got ng-hide on this particular element tied to a variable called hide this, which is in scope as true, which means that it's going to get the ng-hide class. Angular, by default, is going to create a style for this, display none important. I think we've all been writing CSS long enough to know that whenever we have to start resorting to importance all the time, we're doing something wrong, right? That's the way we feel about it. But in this particular case, Angular's done this because they don't know what you're using this with. If you could use this with a number of different frameworks, and if you're using it on some element that the framework says, well, this is a display block element, would have overridden it. So they use the important bang, the bang important style on it. Now, so if you want to override that, well, you just have to get important as well. But again, the problem of displaying none in our original transitions. And this gives us not only a way to come in, but to go out. So, and it's the most simple state. All you really need is just to use ng-hide with an opacity 0, and Angular does the rest for you. Well, besides having the transition on there. So in this particular case, this particular hide and remove system right here is going to scale it up as it fades in. And then whenever you get rid of it, it's going to scale it down and move it over to the right, transform X. Quick demo. So we've got a very simple show and hide. And again, all that is, it's just the original item has an opacity of 1, a transition of 1 second, hide to 0, super simple fade out, and it's not there. It's actually displayed none at this point. And that previous example we had, add a little bit of scale to it, get rid of it quickly. Or we can use keyframe animations to do something a bit more complex. Like Let's have a look at those keyframes. So in this particular case, can you guys see this pretty well? So it goes from scale of 0 and rotation of 0, and over time it rotates to 460 degrees around 75% and goes back to the original position, and then at a pure scale of 1. But over that time, it changes border color several times. Well, I was saying, with keyframe animations, we can do things like change the iteration count. So if I want that to happen multiple times, we get a little bit more control over things. So, and with show hide, well, I've got Flanders over here, and it's just that's the wrong one. And that is 2. All right, well. Sorry. So in this particular case, I've got, that sidebar, I've got 3 buttons. We saw over here, left, center, and right. And what these are doing is they're just changing a variable. So I've got a state variable. If you click the left one, it changes it to left, center, center, and so forth, right? And these, and we have Flanders over here, who has this ng class declaration that is tied to the state. So whatever the state is the class that Flanders is going to get, which just simply transforms him from one side to the other. A slightly more complex version of this, the CSS for it. In this particular case, still going to slide them over to the side, but we can still use, like advanced selectors on these things. So every other child, I'm going to move to the right, and 2n minus 1, so that means the odd ones, are going to get nudged over to the left. So that whenever they get moved out of the way, they provide room for Mo. And I burned through those slides extraordinarily fast, just like I was scared I was going to do. Questions on this? Yes?
Okay, so back to the original example, how does an angular know that essentially you have a transition where it knows to keep elements in the DOM instead of obliterating them from the get-go? It's almost like it's almost got to like predict or know by looking at, I guess, the CSS or something, that you want content for 2 pages on at the same time?
That's a very good question. And the answer is, fortunately, like lost in here. Magic. Angular actually looks at the element and sees if there's a transition.
Okay,
Or if the class is associated with it. It's looked at the style sheet, and it's found that either the element itself has a transition or animation applied to it, or it has, in the style sheet, the ng enter, ng leave, ng class add, or class dash add classes that have transitions or keyframes attached to it. So
how does it know to keep it in the DOM a set period of time? Like
it looks at 2 different things: the duration of the animation and the duration, if you have it, of the delay. So whatever those two together, that's how long it's going to be before it pulls it off the DOM.
So it would look at the delay to also delay adding the classes and stuff to it as well?
Yes. And in like the case of an ng show or hide, it's going to delay actually pulling that ng hide off of it. Because remember, ng hide is banged, important display none, right? So at that point, it's not going to interfere with anything. So the delays are actually really helpful if you're switching between two different bits of content.
Yeah, let's say for instance on that character you wanted to wait the hand. Is there a way to do that, or is there another program? How does that work?
Photoshop. So yeah, I'd take his hand and I'd do a separate little ping over there. And a keyframe animation that has an infinite repetition on it.
Is there an easier way to do it?
To manipulate the image itself, no. But honestly, like all you'd have to do is like clip out that hand, position it, use position absolute, place it right on top of it, and
The reason why
you can go jazz hands if you need it.
I do that, but I've seen certain programs where you just put the end value and the beginning value, and then it kind of moves the hand over to the next position. So
To the image itself?
Yeah, you put the target of where you want to move it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that sounds like some fun Canvas stuff. But at this point in time, there's no way that CSS could manipulate like one part of an image and not the other. Or you could you don't even have to cut it out in Photoshop. I mean, you could just have a different version of the image, put it in a div, crop it. And it's going to be even more work.
Do you have some of these samples online somewhere that we can reference?
I will by the end of the day. I'll provide those links on the conference Twitter feed as well as my own. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Some useful links would be useful, right? We have useful links. Honestly, I've learned an immense amount from the Mozilla Developer Network because, I'll be honest, my memory's crap. There's probably not a day where I don't have to go in and reference some little bit of syntax over there. And I've found their docs to be, especially their animation docs, their keyframe animations and their transition docs, are just absolutely fantastic. The actual documentation is drastically improving. Honestly, when 1.2 came out, was about the time when Angular removed all the comments. And previous to that, the comments were the best part of Angular's documentation. But it's gotten a lot better over time. Year of Moo, that particular website has a fantastic tutorial on 1.2 based animations. And there was a big change from 1.1 to 1.2. The changes coming in 1.3 aren't nearly as immense. There's a great talk that was at ng-conf that's available online. Egghead.io, just great for general Angular information. I tend to spend a lot of time in the car, so I do a lot of podcasts. And JavaScript Jabber has fed my brain on many a commute. And there's one in particular on with Brad Green, who's running the Angular project, where he goes over just kind of how the roadmap is going and how the community is. And it's a really great listen if you want like a bigger overview on Angular that's not quite as technical as a lot of the others. And I just found a new podcast that's purely based on Angular. So I haven't given that one a listen yet, but I'm sure that one's going to be helpful as well. But if you needed that Twitter handle, and I neglect it at times, but I'm trying to be better, especially since I've pretty much entirely left Facebook at this point. But yeah, you can contact me at Blue Kayaks or either my email addresses. Yeah, that was a little short, but thanks.